What's up, internet? It's your soul here, and I'm going to be talking here a bit about, well, politics, peace, the alleged idea of left wing and right wing, a little bit about so-called race, and essentially just looking to try to add in some of my insight into the whole situation, because I've literally spent years here and there in various different groups online discussing these topics, and despite often, I've learned a lot, but despite often people coming to agree with what I'm saying, many times I find that there's just constantly an ever new stream of people coming in saying the same things that they've heard in the mainstream thinking. They've never really thought about many of the ideas I'm putting across, and I find I've had to repeat myself hundreds of times. So part of my aim here is to just lay out some of the details of my position on these things without going too deeply into things, and it's still going to take a fair bit of time to do that because this is a huge subject. I could easily really talk for a day or more on this subject, but I'm going to keep it as short as I can. I'm going to take you through some video clips and relate you to recent news events that flesh out and explain some of what I'm talking about. So we can never know the truth and make the best decisions if we aren't making sense in our own thinking. Often we do not realise that part of our own logic does not make sense and may be lacking depth or contain hidden denials which present errors to us as if they are facts. Simply being able to say that sounds reasonable is not itself evidence of accuracy. As any battle-hardened engineer tasked with creating reliable technology can attest to, the devil is in the details. I've watched the ongoing conflicts between the imagined political left and right with a mixture of bemusement and concern. To me, there are so many gaps in the logic being used to prop up arguments on both sides that at times I find myself needing to just lift out of it all and watch from the sidelines, amused at the situation. Since the imbalance and conflict involved can easily escalate and become extremely serious, as history has shown so many times, I feel compelled to do what I can to add some of the puzzle pieces into the situation that I see to be mostly missing. Part of my challenge here is that once people are locked into fixed viewpoints, they tend to filter out any information that contradicts them, even when the new information would actually free them and help them to feel better. How about we carry out a thought experiment here and suspend our own version of reality temporarily to look at things differently to see what can be learned? Is our anger being artificially channeled into manipulated conflicts? I recently watched videos from significant but relatively minor street conflicts in Portland, America, USA, where it was initially shown to me that antifa, allegedly anti-fascist activists, were attacking seemingly peaceful people on the street who perhaps had right-wing characteristics, but who could not be seen to be being antagonistic, violent, or even specifically right-wing aligned in the video clip. I know from experience that I must always dig deeper than the surface if I'm to know the truth. Most of us, including myself, are not from the Portland area and have no direct understanding of the people and events there on the ground. It was not long before I found more complete footage of the events, which showed the man in the blue hat that Antifa supporters were shouting at, blocking a road on his bike in a defiant way for some time. This man has been identified as Gregory Isaacson, reported by the Portland Mercury newspaper to be a Holocaust denier and member of various far-right white nationalist groups. So that's what we're looking at here. Now, people might debate whether or not he's really a member of these groups and who these groups are and what their real positions are on these topics. Some of these groups have been filmed, including members who aren't white, talking about how they're there to push their ideas, but that they're not a white nationalist group, and that may well be true. However, generally speaking, they are taking a solid position, which does tend to be more what people would call right-wing at the very least. Now, my point here is not really so much about whether he really is that kind of person. I don't know if he is or isn't. I've never met him. The point is that people thought he was that kind of person, perhaps due to stories like this, perhaps because it's true, I don't know. But that's the point that's relevant to what I'm talking about here. The fact is people thought he was a right-wing white nationalist. And the fact that he was stood in the street, as we'll see shortly, blocking Antifa activists kind of proudly on his own, standing there saying nothing, would probably antagonize them and make them think that he was there as their opposition. And since they are aligned in opposition to fascism, in their own sort of logic, it would make sense that this person is in favour of fascism in some way. And that seems to be the background to some of the conflict that was involved, and we can see him here actually.
Let her go out this way. Don't let her go. Let her go. He's not going to move. Let's shoot it. Let's shoot it. Hey, let's
Guys, if you clear off behind him, you'll be able to back out. Oh no, this guy's stopping you. You gonna roll to the side? You go through.
So we can see that generally speaking, this guy isn't doing much to cause direct problem to people, but he is clearly in some way antagonizing the crowd. Perhaps he's just in the way in some way and not responsive, and people don't really know what to do. But in that particular scene, he's not particularly causing a huge issue. But I would say you can tell from his posture that he is there in opposition to people to some extent. Hard to say, isn't it? Perhaps that's why he's taking that posture. It's hard from video footage to prove or disprove that he is or isn't doing anything in particular. Other footage then showed the crowd shouting and trying to get him to move. Some of the crowd then followed two other apparent right-wing activists at the scene who appeared to be members of the right-wing aligned Proud Boys gang. So we can see there that although we've got some scenes missing from the start of this, basically they were shouting, "Why are you standing in the way?" that kind of thing. And, you know, the Proud Boys gang, Proud Boys, right? I mean, that's what you would do if you were a proud boy or a proud man, is basically dress up. I mean, you can see he's got like a pseudo-military kind of dress here with what appears to be some sort of like military type medals or something like that on there. He's wearing a sort of pseudo-military hat. And, you know, just so-called proudly standing in the way to defend something unmentioned. You know, that's the sort of image I get from it anyway. And obviously that's what the crowd kind of thought as well, or they wouldn't have got so pissed off with him, I imagine. But no one actually attacked him, and they were just, you know, generally irate with him and trying to get rid of him. So we're going to have a look at a moment in a video of the Proud Boys and what that's all about. So this footage basically shows that crowd trying to get this guy to move. And at this point we're looking at here, I hadn't seen any violence from anyone in the timeline of what happened from either side or whoever, anyone. Although they were clearly trying to intimidate the guy who's apparently challenging them, no full-on violence had occurred. However, as we can see as we scroll through this video part way, these two guys who seem to be running in support of Isaacson, at some point as they're running along, basically one of them backslaps one of the smaller guys. You can see him falling over, just knocks him to the ground basically, and they basically and this guy here also kicks another guy as well, knocks him down as well. So they literally just started attacking people who were not violent and were just running along with cameras. And, you know, they're acting as if this crowd had suddenly become violent towards them and they were defending themselves, But in reality, that isn't what happened, is it? I mean, it's just not, from what I can see, unless there's other things that have happened off the camera that we're not seeing, but I haven't seen any evidence of that. Now, later on, you can also see this guy in the green basically punching here. I believe this is where he's punching a woman, and later on you can see the crowd are arguing with him and saying that you punched a woman, and he's like, well, someone punched me, so I punched them back. Well, no, that's not what happened. But the point is, this is really the complete opposite of the news story that I was first told, which was that Antifa are really violent and they've caused all these problems. From what I've seen, that isn't what happened at all, at least in this scene. So there's also footage of Antifa supporters throwing a hammer into a truck that drove past them on a bridge, breaking its windows and doors. And, you know, on the surface, it looks pretty damning to them, and in a way it is. However, you can see on that truck that as it drives past, it has a sign up in there saying basically words to the effect of anti-Antifa. Clearly, they weren't just a random truck driving past, they were part of this group's opposition in some way. I'm going to look shortly now at why they are their opposition and why that violence occurred. As far as I know, no one was seriously hurt there. So this is Gavin McInnes. I haven't heard about this person before until I started looking into this, because I'm not in America, so you know, this is just not on my radar. But this is a bunch of clips put together on the topic of the Proud Boys gang and him and what he's been saying. And I preface this with the observation that this video is by Vic Berger, who is someone online who's basically a kind of pseudo comedian satirist who takes clips from the news and edits them together to tell a story which is a bit comical in a lot of cases, but I don't think he actually lies, and in this case it's not comical what he's really done here. It's just a compilation of clips of what this guy's been saying. So let's check it out.
I started this gang called the Proud Boys. And
the Proud Boys?
The Proud Boys.
What's Proud Boys about?
We will kill you. That's the Proud Boys in a nutshell. We will kill you. We look nice. We seem soft. We have boys in our name. But like Bill the Butcher and the Bowery Boys, we will assassinate you. Now, part of the reason I agree to do the talk is because I'm allowed to bring all my guys. And we can fight our way in and fight our way out. Beating the shit out of these people. I think it's our job to do it. And the cops just turn a blind eye. If you're wearing a MAGA hat, as Sal is right now, Sal's in the studio, folks.
Oh my God, this is Sal Cipolla. Where are you from?
On here.
Wow, you came a long way.
If you're wearing a MAGA hat and some guy with a slightly punk demeanor comes up to you and says, hey, are you Sal or are you pro-Trump? Choke him. Trust your instincts. Don't listen to what he has to say. Choke him. If I do a video where I say, how about we start throwing bricks? Is that legal? You can't call for violence on a specific person, but can you say they're throwing bricks? We should throw bricks. Can you call for violence generally? Because I am. Fighting solves everything. We need more violence from the Trump people, Trump supporters. Choke a motherfucker, choke a bitch, choke a tranny. Get your fingers around the windpipe. I want violence, I want punching in the face. I'm disappointed in Trump supporters for not punching enough. Get a fucking gun. Get ready to blow someone's fucking head off. I've even killed people in my dreams. That's how awesome my gun is.
Get in trouble, get arrested, get fired. Let's all get in this together. They can't kill us all.
Yeah, I got green tips, man. Those go through at least 3 bodies.
Oh, beautiful. Plop. I love the way he falls on his ass. They said, you want to go? I said, yeah, I want to fucking go. And I punched him in the face. And then Coulter emailed me later and she goes, conservatives never punched anyone in the face. Finally, things are turning around.
And then Malmsberg goes, you're not advocating violence, are you? And I go, I absolutely am. It's a wonderful, effective thing.
This is a fucking war.
Right, so that's who Antifa were basically marching against, as I understand it, those types of characters. They have basically killed people. They're calling for more killing of people, and it's hardly surprising that people are going to be edgy and feeling intimidated or antagonized by their presence there. And in a way, if you're up against people who are literally calling for your murder, you know, it's quite impressive that you would be so restrained as to just fire some silly string at them, isn't it? So I'm not saying that any of this violence on either side is justified or healthy. It's not. My point is just to highlight the missing pieces of the puzzle, which those with agendas are happy to leave out. The initial coverage of these events left out any mention of the actions and intents of the Proud Boys, and instead sought to frame the situation as if they were being attacked without cause. Many of those who support Antifa consider that they are fighting against Nazism, and could be said to be, in some senses at least, following in the steps of the Allied forces in World War II. Understandably, they aren't going to be doing that while meditating in complete order in a park somewhere, hundreds of miles from their perceived opposition. This misrepresentation of events demonstrates the same pattern that occurred several weeks before, where an elderly gentleman was shown bloodied at the hands of Antifa activists, feeding perception of Antifa as being generally made up of evil terrorists. And this is actually a webpage, as you can see, Blue Lives Matter, basically a sort of pro-police site ultimately. And this story was run really very biased, showing this old gentleman with blood. Violent, black-masked Antifa protesters attacked an elderly man in the crowd with a crowbar, bats and mace. Black-masked Antifa were captured on video as they attacked an elderly man who walked through the area where they were marching in downtown Portland on Saturday. The video, posted by Human Events managing editor Ian Miles Chung, showed a group of thugs grabbing an elderly man with white hair and beating him with a crowbar and spraying him with mace. A big man in a black shirt with a red beard tried to intervene, but Antifa members beat him as well, beating him over the head before they sprayed him with mace as well. But the man did not give up helping the elderly man. The video showed the big bleeding man heading over to help the elderly man, but then he was attacked again by masked Antifa, who shoved him away and up on the sidewalk, where they sprayed him again from an industrial-sized can of mace. So it sounds pretty damning, sounds pretty, shocking, terrible that this would happen, these thugs attacking a grey-haired old man. And yeah, that isn't good, is it? It's terrible. But here's the thing, and I don't usually recommend Snopes, but as it happens, they've done a fairly good coverage of this. This elderly gentleman with grey hair was then shown in other footage prior to him having been hit, stalking the crowd with an extended baton, grabbing someone who had been fighting another by the throat and attempting to strike with his baton. He could have easily walked away, but instead he actively attacked before being left bloodied. And you can see here on Snopes, they asked the question, did this actually happen? And it's a mixture. The older man is identified as John Bloom, was hit in the head, causing him to bleed during a street brawl. Correct. Bloom was not simply trying to help someone. Video shows he was charging at people with a baton and fighting with anti-fascist demonstrators. So, as we scroll down here, you can actually see the footage. Hey, hey! So you can see him here in the black hat. As you could see, he got into a bit of a fist fight with a guy there with a helmet on, tried to strike him with his baton. Then he didn't just run away and say, "Oh, I'm an old man, I've been attacked." He actively moved towards everyone with his baton. So this is hardly an example of masked thugs going around randomly attacking an old guy. It's quite a big old guy with a baton attacking them and then fighting together. So again, this is just another example of false information, a false narrative being projected, political bias, political agenda, propaganda. And I'm pointing this out for a good reason here. Anytime I'm told that something is true that leads me to devalue a particular group and then find out that I've only been given half the truth, probably deliberately, I feel misled, and rightfully I lose trust in the people who gave me the false information. The US government and many other governments, via their active departments such as the CIA and other groups, have often been shown to engage in this kind of psychological warfare. So we need to be particularly careful when defining our reality in relation to media we are being shown. This kind of false flag method of psychological manipulation, whereby one group antagonises or attacks another and attempts to have the blame pinned on their target, is a common tactic used to manipulate both during times of war, such as the case of Operation Northwoods, a US plot to attack their own people and blame it on Castro in Cuba, and also in daily political life on the streets of many nations. And you can see here, this is a meme highlighting just very briefly the details of Operation Northwoods, and you can go and look this up. The documents do exist. The basically higher levels of the military signed off on this. They were quite happy to go along with it, and then it was stopped by the very top level of politics before it became a reality. Operation Northwoods is a documented false flag attack plan originated within the United States government in 1962. False flag attacks are a military and war tactic used since Roman times. It called for the CIA and other operatives to commit genuine acts of terrorism in US cities on both military and innocent civilian targets. These acts of terrorism were to be blamed on Cuba in order to create public support for a war against that nation. Operation Northwoods included proposals for hijacking and shooting down commercial airplanes, attacks on our own military and US Navy ships, and bombing civilians in American cities, followed by the introduction of phony evidence and other tactics that would implicate the Cuban government. They say here, does any of this sound familiar to you? Because this is the claim that many have made with regards to 9/11, the Iraq War, and many other events as well. So this isn't just some vague theory. This is documented, proven, tracked by many people, in many examples to have taken place, not just by Americans, but by many different governments. So my point here is that if you are seeing evidence of an apparent crime or violence and it involves two groups, one against another, let's say, don't just assume that what you're seeing is the full story. It's entirely possible that the whole thing is being orchestrated to get you to support a certain group to push through certain politics that you wouldn't otherwise get behind. If you can demonize your political opponents and make them seem much worse than they are, it's much easier to get support for your otherwise unreasonable approach and to have your approach sound suddenly reasonable. To be clear, I'm not saying that Antifa are balanced and entirely operating within integrity. There are many people under that banner, and I certainly don't know any of them well enough to comment totally accurately. It's clear that some are aligned to what looks to be authoritarian communism, and there are likely to be others who are, in reality, deliberately inserted agents provocateurs too, meaning that police and other groups often infiltrate groups like that and insert their own people who incite violence in order to then arrest some of the members of the group who go along with it. My own position is that any form of authoritarianism is in opposition to the balance and liberation that we need in order to thrive. To me, since fascism is authoritarian, it is a real menace, and it is completely understandable that an opposition to it will gain support. Authoritarian communism is also a huge threat to the well-being of the planet due to its many denials of respect for free will, just for starters. It is natural to feel the need to protect against heartless control and authoritarian overpowering. Millions have died through many different forms of such evil, including state communism, Nazism, and the heavily denied torture camps of the CIA and other such capitalist-inspired groups. And you can read the free book CIA as Organised Crime for more information on this by Douglas Valentine. However, we need to go to the roots of the situation to stop the conflict in a peaceful and lasting way, without adding fuel to fires that have burned for far too long already. We need to, through our careful thinking and right action, be the light at the end of the tunnel. In an unbalanced world, finding true balance is a major challenge, but it must be done for us to even survive, let alone thrive into the future. We need to elevate our understanding of the conflicts in order to end them and create a productive and lasting unity and respectful peace that feels good to all involved. If we get caught up in taking sides without seeking to gain a deep understanding from a higher level of consciousness than the level from which the problems originated, we will fail to achieve any kind of lasting improvement. What can we learn from the bigger picture here? So, lessons from the past. In a recent piece by Eve Fairbanks in the Washington Post, she draws parallels between the language of the so-called reasonable right in America, speakers like Ben Shapiro and Jordan Peterson, and the language of the Southern Confederate soldiers and their supporters during the American Civil War. The author highlights that if you read much of the writing from the time of the Civil War, the supporters of slavery were claiming to be fighting on the side of reason and civility, in the same way that today's reasonable right often do too. The Confederate writers' position was often essentially that black people are biologically made to work in the fields, and if whites could do that work, they would, along with other such well-reasoned logic. It was further highlighted by them that black people are inherently less intelligent than white people, and therefore we should think of these groups differently, and rather than adapt to work together to support and strengthen the weak points that might exist in each group, we should just go along with nature, and the more intelligent should just exploit the less intelligent. The enslavers were painted to be such heroes in their own minds and propaganda that they were even projecting that they were somehow protecting the slaves from a certain death because the dark-skinned people were just too unevolved to survive without their white masters. I've literally heard Stefan Molyneux, who is probably described accurately as a member of the reasonable right, yet amusingly sometimes mislabelled as an anarchist, discussing this topic of alleged inherent difference of intelligence in recent times, and while he claims that he was distraught at learning of it originally having been proven, he went on to say that he had to accept it and adjusted his thinking accordingly. What better way to justify boosting your own position in the world than claiming that there is a fundamentally unchangeable reality with regards to your own inheritance and DNA and that of other people, which automatically makes you superior and more reliable in some way? That sounds familiar, doesn't it? The extremist eugenicist fantasies of Adolf Hitler and perhaps even Jeffrey Epstein, plus his wealthy cronies, absolutely come to my mind. There are many denials here which are obvious if you think about the situation. How can white people truly be superior to black people if they aren't able to achieve the same level of physical activity, for example? Wouldn't true superiority include physical superiority too? For white superiority to be true, it has to be proven that the thinking of white people is superior at the very least. Yet we are talking about millions of individuals, and who exactly gets to be the judge and jury of intelligence anyway? In my experience, it is certainly true that these groups share traits that are common among them and different to each other. Thus, in general, they have different pros and cons, but that doesn't make them inherently inferior or superior to each other. For me, a truly superior way of thinking that comes from the heart would be for the white people to respond to their average apparent physical inferiority with honesty and look to understand how they can improve their own strength in a balanced way. However, I do not recall ever once hearing these proponents of slavery stating that they themselves were physically inferior. Instead, the preference seems to have been denial that they have such a problem and to try to cover up their inferiority with violent domination. Faced with such intent to dominate with violence, it is understandable that enslaved people are unsure what to do, since they seem to be being forced to become violent themselves to defend themselves, and may not want to do that or know how to do it without being killed. Is slavery really evidence of a superior mind? No. It's evidence of a lack of heart, empathy, and deep understanding of the nature of self and balance. Who started the violence and overpowering? In the case of slavery, despite claims that darker-skinned people did historically take white-skinned slaves at various points, I don't think this can be stretched to the point where we can say that the enslavement and raping of Africa by forces such as those led by Cecil Rhodes and the British Empire were the fault of the black Africans who became enslaved. No matter how much reason is used to try to justify the enslavement, the fact remains that kidnapping, torturing, raping and murdering your way across the continent for personal power gain is only evidence of your own imbalance and evil intentions. What we have been dealing with right through history in various forms has been reflective of a power struggle, where all manner of delusions and lies have been presented as fact by reasoning that leaves out obvious parts of the story by those invested in taking power away from others for themselves in an unloving way. We've investigated ourselves and cleared ourselves of wrongdoing. We only need to look at the many extreme cases of police violence, crime and malfeasance that constantly flow from the US to learn why it is not usually helpful to rely only on your own assessment of yourself when it comes to measuring your own intelligence or integrity. As long as the police are themselves being policed mainly by their own ranks, they consistently fail to accept and learn from the truth of their failings. In fact, they exploit the situation to carry out their own personal agendas with little fear of repercussions. I'm not going to show you the video here, but this is a story just from what I saw today. I could put up endless stories of this nature from sites like Free Thought Project, a site which was claimed to be basically terrorists at one point as well, which is absurd considering that what they mainly do is expose criminal activities by government and police. But this story here is an excellent example. It's a terrifying and yet excellent example of what I'm talking about. A man, black-skinned man, parked his tractor in a Walmart car park. Police approached him with regards to an allegation that he had trespassed on his neighbour's property. Not committed any other crimes, just basically was where he shouldn't have been, apparently. That's the claim. They claimed to have a warrant for his arrest. He asked to see the warrant. They didn't produce the warrant. Apparently they didn't even have the warrant with them. So he began peacefully resisting. Ultimately, there was no warrant, so he didn't want to submit to arrest. And within a few minutes, they'd killed him. They literally choked him from behind and killed him. And he wasn't fighting at all. And, you know, this is just one example of the way it's very common for the police in America to hugely mistreat black-skinned people, as they have done previously for hundreds of years. And yes, I know the police do also mistreat white-skinned people sometimes and all people sometimes, but there's definitely a huge slant going on from the evidence coming out that we see over and over and over again whereby one group is being treated clearly differently to another. In this case, and several other cases that are quite famous I can think of, a black man was literally choked to death for either no proven crime or very minor infractions. Yet we saw earlier on footage of this guy pulling out a samurai sword next to cops, and the cop basically ducks under it and walks off, right? So, funny. He didn't get choked to death, did he? Why was that, I wonder? Sounds like bias, doesn't it? But it's Antifa and the left wing that are really violent and nasty. Let's remember that. It's nothing. The right wing are all angels. As the problems escalate ever higher, they reach the point of drawing calls for violent revolution from the rest of the population who cannot tolerate the situation any longer. I've lost count of the number of videos I've seen of US police treating unarmed, even handcuffed and even wheelchair-bound people like punch bags, or just shooting them without any ethical justification at all. And I take this epic level of heartlessness to be a reflection from which we need to learn now. In some cases, the police are deliberately and knowingly evil, but in other cases, they've bought into false beliefs that, like the enslavers from previous centuries, have them believing that their own evil is actually justified and rational. This failure to be open to viewpoints that cast you in a negative light is the root of much spiritual dysfunction globally, and creates what we can call our shadow self. Everything that is truly within us, but which we refuse to accept, continues to run us from our subconscious, but we do not notice. Until this shadow self is healed, we may find we create the most acrobatic of mental gymnastics in order to justify positions that simply don't hold up to honest examination. In some cases, people will become violent to defend their undefendable position, rather than honestly adapt to the truth. If we are truly going to evolve and balance humanity, we need to consider that we ourselves may have more involvement in the causality of the problems we see around us than we have so far wanted to admit. Self-acceptance has the answers. The roots of most of our problems come from denial and our own unrecognised low self-worth. When we deny reality in ourselves, we don't feel good and lose touch with something important within ourselves or in the world around us. Often we lose personal power and even love. Just holding the belief that I am stupid is enough to cause us emotional harm, and to cause a likely unconscious reaction in our thinking that attempts to fix that situation. Sometimes a survival fear is unconsciously driving us that says we will perish due to lacking something important. These are often the roots of inferiority complexes, which themselves are actually the cause of much real weakness in people. Yet when we ourselves suffer from such inferiority complexes, we tend to misinterpret them as being part of the solution and not part of the problem, so they live on. Putting down others is not a valid way to raise yourself up, yet it is commonly attempted anyway, and draws the focus away from the real details of what is being argued over, and thus solutions are held away. Many people unconsciously believe that attack is the best form of defence, and this can combine with defence mechanisms powered by low self-esteem, resulting in a kind of denied and undercurrent or camouflaged attacking of particular groups that are judged to be inferior in some way. The reality is that we can't achieve greatness by holding others down. We just weaken everyone in the process and tend to also deny reality, holding ourselves away from a position that could have allowed us to evolve in a more optimal way. In the case of many prominent thinkers of today who rile up various groups, these psychological errors, manipulations and denials often feel to be translating into literal bullying. While they may not be involved in physical bullying, their thoughts and words tend to be cunningly disguised behind rhetoric and fairly sophisticated thinking that attempts to have us bowing to their own manufactured voice of authority. In our busy lives, most people don't have the inclination to listen carefully enough to pick apart the inaccuracies in the claims being made by speakers on divisive topics, and so the true intents and flaws often go unnoticed. In cases where people do try to highlight the flaws, many of those with entrenched beliefs tend to skip over the details or just give up listening and thinking before they get deep enough to realise what they've previously missed. We need to be truly open-minded and willing to consider all possibilities here, or risk continuing to go around in the same circles that have held humanity captive for hundreds of years already. There's no way around it. You cannot be an empowered person by deferring your thinking to someone else. Clearly there are many in society who are struggling to gain power, and who have no problem lying and manipulating others to get it. Instead of trusting no one, it's wiser to go inward and trust yourself first. Once you know yourself, you are much more empowered in knowing others and feeling where you've been lied to. A core reality of the different skin colours and also of different political leanings is that first and foremost we are all of the same origin and all humans. We share far more in common with each other than actually divides us. Despite claims to the contrary, the divisions among racial groups tend to be more about power gain and financial exploitation, justified by false beliefs grounded in a lack of self-acceptance, than they are about truly justified grievances that prevent groups uniting peacefully. It's only through self-elevation, realization and empowerment that we can step out of the shadows that hold us in a perpetual state of conflict-oriented thinking. Once we know that we can achieve everything that we need without overpowering others, and that to do so requires total integrity, balance and honest acceptance of absolute truth, we can easily let go of thinking we need to fight for survival and instead move towards more productive activity. So, left or right? The history of the phrases left wing and right wing originates in the French Revolution. The right wing were monarchists and the left wing were opponents to monarchy. Technically both were probably statists, meaning that they were in favour of government, since the wings refer to physical wings of seats in the parliaments of the parliamentary meeting place. This original meaning, however, seems to have been largely denied and lost over the years, so that we tend to not even fully agree on what left and right mean when using the phrases in debate. For me, a path of balance requires that no one is ruling anyone else, so using the traditional meaning for left and right, I have to choose neither. I do not want or need an empire-building mentality to rule over me, right wing, and I do not specifically choose to have an alternative form of government rule over me. I choose a path of truth, freedom and well-being. Balance, in other words, and I don't see a way for those to be achieved while government is used to try to force the will of a few onto everyone else. This simple logic holds true for me no matter how I look at it. Some people claim that right wing means independence and self-determination, with minimal government involvement, while, they say, left wing tends to mean a large state and control of everyone else. This, though, is not a version of these terms that fits well with their origins. I personally have no desire to try to make progress in life or death political problem areas, while the basic language being used to define the landscape is not even coherent or agreed upon among everyone involved. My suggestion is to think like an engineer. What are the objectives of politics? Are they to set everyone in competition to produce a winner, or is the objective to ensure that people are fed and able to survive, even when they may be incapable of looking after themselves? In many ways, this whole topic is one of deciding who amongst us will survive the longest and who will be doing the work to make that happen. I understand that the more I feel happy and able to act on my own will, the longer I'm likely to survive and the healthier I'll be. Therefore, respect for free will is the primary objective in life for me, since nothing else can exist without it for long. Authoritarianism, therefore, is in opposition to survival, and so any system that is created must not be supportive of individual will being overpowered by it in any way. Simultaneously, I understand and feel that I cannot be happy and feel good to the point that I want to continue living if there is a lack of love in life. Love is as essential to those who can feel as air is to those who can breathe. So I understand that compassion is also a primary objective for any successful system of life management. Perhaps you can see and feel how my observations here draw us into the middle of what is often called left and right. We need the compassion of the left, which seeks to protect those who lack resources, and we need the independence and respect for the individual will too, which supporters of the right often claim that the left lacks. In truth, left and right are distractions that have no place in a precisely defined and understood solution to our problems. We need to go deeper and closer to the actual mechanics of creating harmony and peace. Grossly oversimplified labels have gotten us nowhere but killed historically. How about we look at things holistically as we move forward and stop fighting each other over such small-minded imbalances? Part of this process involves understanding the real roots of the power of governments and how they only have our own power to work with. So understanding where we have been giving our power away and stopping doing it is an essential early step here. I can't predict the future accurately to lay out a roadmap, but I do know that a balanced and peaceful world is one that makes respect for free will its top priority, and that means we don't overpower others or ourselves as we direct our own destinies on this amazing planet. Am I in the middle then? Perhaps I'm actually simply politically inner, which is a totally different dimension to the prevailing power struggle that has plagued us for so long. So yeah, that's actually really a relatively brief comment on all of this, because this is a very complex subject, and really I'm only touching on the surface and going one or two levels deeper, let's say, than that, and there are many levels even deeper which are beyond the context of this particular post. I would like to think that from what I've shown you here, some people who view this will have their minds opened a bit and realise that some of the definitions they've been fed and that they've been using are lacking in detail, and that we need to value a depth of definition when it comes to thinking of these complex subjects, so that we don't get confused and mislead ourselves and other people and maybe cause violence and problems that we don't need to. I'd say a good rule of thumb is that if someone's calling you to be violent, then they're probably not someone that you should be paying much attention to. And that includes governments who tell you to go and join a military as well. If you've enjoyed this small essay and comment on such a complex topic as this, then please do let me know in the comments. If you've hated what I've done here as well, let me know as well. I want to hear your feedback. And if you support what I'm doing, definitely please do give me a like, an upvote, re-steam, reblog, and share it along with your friends here, there and everywhere on social networks. It would really help me to put more time into what I'm doing here. If the more I'm supported, helps me to achieve more and help me feedback some of what I've learned from so many amazing people back to the world to help everyone else too. So let's share the love, and until next time, peace.